So the videos I had in mind to follow up with the Dark Tuner Synchro mechanic are either going to be delayed, or outright never going to be made. Since I made that video on November 2nd of 2018, several Inca support cards were revealed, while not adapted from the anime, still shit out Inti and Quilla like Taco Bell Aftermath. And around the same time a Reptilian card floated out of the same nowhere that the Inca cards came from, and then every Fortune Fairy got adapted. I kind of lost my motivation to make the video around the Dark Steiners anime cards, since it felt like that at that point, they would be adapted by Konami at any time, or just plain new and better cards would be printed for them. After the mentioned cards were revealed, it's been pretty quiet since then as far as Dark Steiner cards go, but I'd rather just let them go for now, mostly out of paranoia and partially a lack of interest. However, I have been wanting to make more Yu-Gi-Oh videos, so let's roll back from Dark Synchros to the Fortune Cup. This video goes out to my bro Sir Thomas, who requested this video specifically.
Look at you being special, bitch!
I present to you this anime adaptation on the Psychoanalysis deck used by this dueling assassin. Huh. The fuck? There's really not that much detail that's necessary to explain about the Fortune Cup, just that it was used to weed out the signers. Actually, that's about fucking it, isn't it? The Professor, or Professor Frank in the dub, was first introduced in episode 14, but it was both episode 18 and 19 when he actually had this time in the spotlight, and then never showed up again. He lost off-screen in episode 18 against Commander Coda, on purpose just to play a constellation game against Luna for the sole purpose to hypnotize her and gain access to the spirit dimension, via a specific trap card to force her to activate ancient forests. Without going into details about the events unfolded after, the Professor gave off predatory vibes, and Ancient Fairy Dragon gave off even more predatory vibes. Ancient Fairy Dragon nearly killed the Professor, who was too slightly insane to notice, until Luna used a trap card called Oberon's Prank to bring the duel to a draw and save him from getting omnom by the bandless bad bitch. While I don't really find the Professor that interesting compared to other one-off characters that popped in throughout the Yu-Gi-Oh series, his deck is a completely different story. This Psychoanalysis deck is based off various aspects from the eponymous school of thought, and if an eponym goes over your head, the direct definition is a person after whom a discovery, invention, place, etc. is named or thought to be named. An example of an eponym is Walt Disney, for whom Disneyland is named. And the ace monster of this deck is Ido the Supreme Magical Force, a level 6 Dark Fiend type monster with 2200 attack and 800 defense, and its effect is destroy all other monsters you control. If this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, special summon it from your graveyard during the end phase. Yeah, the way the first sentence is worded makes a continuous effect, but it fits what he's based on perfectly, which is on the concept of id, which, defined by Sigmund Freud, is an inherent part of the human mind that drives the most savage instincts, and those two words are important for the context of this effect, as it savagely destroys every other monster on the field while it exists, but through the instinct to survive will bring itself back if destroyed. This monster's design and name is based off a monster from the 1956 sci-fi fantasy drama Forbidden Planet. The id monster's inspiration clearly shows in both their design and characteristics, and just like Ido, the id monster comes back every night, but it's invincible in a literal sense. In the context of Forbidden Planet, it does match the conceptual idea behind Ido, but I'd rather not spoil the movie. It's been years since I last seen this movie, and I was completely surprised that this would have some direct influence over a card, but from what I do remember, I had a fun time watching it, and I'm sure you will too. Only 2 of the 8 cards this guy used were real. Pot of Avarice, which exists in the same realm as Ancient Fairy Dragon, and Ido was released in Crimson Crisis, and the spirit of his effect is intact. Instead of the constant effect of destroying all monsters on your field, it only happens on the summon, which was moved from the end phase of that turn to the standby phase of the following turn. So the 2 concepts are squeezed together. You can only control one, not that you would ever summon another to begin with, so no loss there. However, you cannot summon monsters, and this does include flip summoning. As much as I love it from a background standpoint, as well as its design, this card is pretty bad. It does everything it can do to make sure that the only face-up monster on your side of the field to exist is a tribute monster, and since its revival effect can only happen via its card effect, it's not going to do that job too well, and even then it's prone to get hit by Called by the Grave, or be negated by too many things. The best utility you can get out of this thing is to generously give it to your opponent. Literally the only profile I could find searching Ido the Supreme Magical Force deck is Ido Toon's Lockdown, which actually does look interesting, it just needs to be updated. Super Heavy Samurais have a card that can actually send it over to your opponent from your hand. Just be sure not to lock yourself into Super Heavy Sams that turn through their effects. I probably said enough about Ido, so let's move on to the meat of the video and look over the anime cards and their hypothetical adaptions. We're looking at 6 cards total, and their effects are pretty short, with the exception of 1. So I'm just going to roll it through their effects first, then talk about them individually. Starting off with Symmetry Rorschach. a light level 3 spellcaster type monster with 1200 attack and 1200 defense, and if this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, look at the top card of your opponent's deck. Immortal Homeostasis is an equip card that says the equipped monster cannot be destroyed by battle. During the equipped monster's controller's standby phase, if the equipped monster's attack is different from its original attack, its controller takes 300 damage. Spirit Contamination, a normal spell that says activate only during the turn a monster you control is destroyed. Select one spell or trap card your opponent controls and destroy it. Wave of Ill Intent. A continuous spell card that says each time a monster you control is destroyed by battle, inflict 300 damage to your opponent. Gestalt Trap is a continuous trap card, and you can equip this card to a monster your opponent controls. The equipped monster's attack and defense become 0 and its effects are negated. And then Light to the Depths. A normal trap card that says activate only when your opponent summons a light monster. Your opponent sends the top 5 cards of their deck to the graveyard. Then, they draw one card and reveal it. Unless that card or a card with the same name is played by the end of this turn, inflict 2000 damage to your opponent. Symmetry Rorschach is based off of the Rorschach Inkblock test, which is used for the professor to ask what Luna sees. And yeah, its stats are bad. And its effect is bad. Immortal Homeostasis is Mist Body with extra stuff, and is supposed to work in tandem with Gestalt Belt, but on its own, it's okay-ish, though not worth running. As the name refers, it's based on homeostasis. While the equipped monster becomes immortal through battle immunity, as long as the attack remains constant, meaning it's original. If it's not, the spell builds a controller to encourage them to restore balance. Spirit Contamination is a bad MST, Wave of Ill Intent is bad burn damage and I want to stop looking at it. Gestalt Bell is actually pretty decent. I'd even say it's better than Phoenix Chain and Fogblade. The only ramification being that it doesn't leave the field when the monster does, but hey, the opponent's Boral Sword is useless, assuming Gestalt Bell wasn't already popped or baited. It's based on Gestalt Psychology, which is based on the understanding and perceiving the whole sum of an object rather than its components, and that's all I was willing to get from the wiki. If you want to know more, link is in the description. Light to the Depths is probably one of the worst cards I've ever seen. By today's standards, light monster your opponent will be summoning is either a Thunder or Guard Dragon, and you've not only set up their graveyard for them to utilize, they actually plus in the process. And I'm pretty sure Light Swings were a thing when this card was revealed, so you were guaranteed to have your opponent go yard in your ass because you wanted to try to burn your opponent for a chunk of 2000 damage that they'd never even take. It's an interesting concept for a deck to be based on psychology, but it's a shame that it was executed with very little effort. Before we get into the adaptation, I feel it's appropriate to talk about how I went about adapting them. So the only cards that actually followed the psychology concept were these 4 here, but Spirit Contamination and Wave of Ill Intent don't really fit that. They're only there to symbolize the professor's presence contaminating the dual spirit dimension and his ill intent of becoming the ruler. I will acknowledge that Light of the Depths could follow the same line of thought, but I feel it holds more relevance than the other 2 because it was essential to get into Luna's mind. To shine a light in the depths of her psyche and the spirit world, so to speak. Which does fit enough in the context with psychology seeing into Luna's mind for me to not want to lump them in with contamination and ill intent. So I'll be going over the anime adaptation of these 4 first, then go over the other 2 after as more generic support. And with that out of the way, I hope you're ready to see these essays of card effects, starting with Symmetry Rorschach. If you control no monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, you can add 1 item of the Supreme Magical Force from your deck or graveyard to your hand. If this card is distributed for a tribute summon, you can reveal a top card of your opponent's deck. Apply the appropriate effect depending on the type of card revealed. Monster. Add 1 Immortal Homeostasis from your deck to your hand. Spell. Add 1 Gestalt Trap from your deck to your hand. Trap. Add 1 Light to the Depths from your deck to your hand. During your opponent's turn, you can discard this card and target 1 card listed in this card's card text. That target is unaffected by your opponent's card effects this turn. You can only use this effect of Symmetry Rorschach once per turn. It reveals the top card of your opponent's deck, and then some. Its symbolic relevance to reveal a card is to literally play a Rorschach test for Luna, then act to distribute fodder for the ace monster, that being Ido. So, the Terror Top effect is in place to act on the tribute summon part, and then it adds one of the listed cards depending on what your opponent reveals, in reference to the original effect, excluding the need to destroy a monster by battle. And of course, each of these cards listed are important, so it also acts as a protection, and it can be recycled as you'll see later. Yeah, it's really wordy, and I could have just added a word to each of them to lump it together to make an archetype, but I didn't. Why? I don't know. Looks sweet and secret rare though. Immortal Homeostasis. This card is also treated as a quick play spell card while either the Supreme Magical Force is faced up on the field. The equipped monster cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects. If a monster's, with different attack than the equipped monster, is summoned to that monster's controller's side of the field, the controller of the equipped monster takes damage equal to the difference, or whichever with the highest difference if multiple monsters are summoned. If this card leaves the field, your opponent takes control of 1 face-up monster you control, but only it can attack for the rest of this turn, and it's destroyed at the end phase. You can only activate Immortal Homeostasis once per turn. If an item of the Supreme Magical Force is on the field, you can target one Symmetry Rorschach in your graveyard. Shuffle it into the deck, and if you do, add this card from your graveyard to your hand. This one really took me some time to think over. Definitely the most out of all of them. I've already explained this card's concept and how it works in practice with this effect, but while I really do appreciate this, the execution is poor in practice. So the burden in this case is to keep things in constant with the monsters summoned around the equipped one, rather than itself. In generic use, I made sure that there's a big ramification for this, that being your opponent taking control of a monster you own, and good chance of it reaching the end phase to get destroyed, because it'll more than likely get used as material for a summon. That is, unless you give them Ido. The idea is to focus on Ido control. Your opponent would be forced to take him and be locked out of summoning for that turn, and only attacking with Ido, and in this case you run cards to account for that. Acts as a quick play because I want to be as effective as possible, and recycling Rorschach because recycling is good. Activate this card by targeting one monster your opponent controls. Negate the effects of that face-up monster while it is on the field, and its attack and defense become 0. If Ido the Supreme Magical Force leaves the field, set this face-up card. Then you can take one Symmetry Rorschach from your deck and either add it to your hand, or send it to the graveyard. You can only use this effective Gestalt Trap once per turn. If this card will leave the field, you can shuffle it back into the deck instead. I don't feel I really have to explain this one at this point, but there is something I want to talk about because I thought it was a neat idea. Immortal Homeostasis burn effect triggers, so you can chain this in response to that trigger, resolve this, that monster's attack becomes 0, resolve for more potential burn if your opponent summons big monsters. In any other case other than Ido control, this card would be dead face up on the field. Also, it shuffles itself back into the deck if it leaves the field because... okay, I can't remember why I did that, but I'm this far in the script and I'm not going back now. Apply one of the appropriate effects. If there's no Ido the Supreme Magical Force on the field, and you control no monsters, special summon one from your hand, deck, or graveyard to your opponent's side of the field, but it's destroyed during the end phase. If your opponent controls Ido the Supreme Magical Force, set one Gestalt Trap from your deck to the field, and it can be activated this turn. If you control Ido the Supreme Magical Force, take one Immortal Homeostasis from your deck or graveyard and either equip it to a monster your opponent controls, or add it to your hand. Then send all monsters you control to the graveyard, except Ido the Supreme Magical Force. If Symmetry Rorschach is in your graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard, add that card to your hand, then draw one card. I'm going to be completely transparent. I have no clue if this card will be overkill or not. I just want to make sure that the board state you would want for Ido control can be achieved easily, and this would be the best way to do it. You technically could use it generically, but at the end of the turn you're getting that Ido, so it wouldn't be ideal in anything but Ido control, I think. Get your Gestalt Trap fast, Immortal Homeostasis just as so, and add back the Symmetry Rorschach for a +2. And with the direct Eponymous School of Thought cards out of the way, we move on to the last two cards, second to last being Mental Pollution. Activate only if a card's on the field are destroyed by a card effect and sent to your graveyard. Destroy cards on your opponent's side of the field up to the same number of cards that were destroyed by that effect. You can only activate Mental Pollution once per turn. You may notice immediately the name change. According to the wiki, this card is not a part of the Spirit archetype, since it doesn't possess the Japanese characters for it, so instead of subjecting every Spirit card to have a series of excepts in the card text, better to rename it outright. Putting the Japanese name through Google Translate makes it Mental Pollution, and that sounds good enough for me. Anyway, either destroys itself, destroy one card your opponent's side of the field, or if you control more than one monster, somehow, when Ido summons himself during the standby phase and everything else pops, you could destroy even more cards. The support cards I made as of yet for Ido control already do the job just fine, but this was on Professor Frank's list of cards to use, so I would take the opportunity to make this as support for various decks rather than Ido himself. Run at your own risk, or play it in something that causes self-terrorism consistently. Lastly, this card again. Once per turn, when any monsters are destroyed by card effect, inflict 300 damage to your opponent for each. Same deal as Mental Pollution, and honestly not much to say besides that, and I swear it's not an excuse to get this off the screen as fast as possible. Burn baby burn. I have a love and affection for many ideas and archetypes throughout 5Ds, if the Dark Synchro Tuner video is any indicator of that. But I found the Professor's deck to be one of the most interesting out of the many of them, even with the little amount of cards the Psychoanalysis deck actually has. We've seen many decks follow mythologies or cool aesthetics for their design, but how many of them meld together from just concepts? I did not expect their ace monster to be based on an old sci-fi that predates it by over half a century, and also take massive inspiration by it in terms of effect and design. Would Konami realistically go back to make these? Obviously not directly based on my design. I want to say yes, with the left field support we've gotten for old decks recently, but then again the majority of them from iconic characters in the series. And the Professor certainly didn't leave a lasting mark for anything memorable, but I'll keep my fingers crossed and hope that they might. And I'm sure you will too, you Dino Miss Rockin' Rose Dragon playing Ultra Athlete bitch. Ladies and gentlemen, dudes and dudettes, this was your boy Beta, and I wish you good whatever time it is. See y'all in the next one.